So I am recording because not everyone could be here today, right? So obviously we say a week ago, everyone needs to come exactly at 3 o'clock in 7 days from now. And not everyone can be here, shocking. But thank you for coming. This is like classic midsummer wing it mode. And so I'm not in full wing it mode like a normal semester. But full kind of draw for the intake and onboarding recommendations. So starting in the fall, there was a work group charged by steering committee, Guided Pathway Steering Committee. It was a huge work group that had lots of sub-work groups. It was led by Liz Doherty and Dawson, who's here. And they worked on looking at all of the things that a student goes through from initial contact through a certain point in the first semester. And their goal, what they were tasked with, was looking at creating recommendations based on one, kind of national best practices, but also kind of what our current practices are here at NBC and some of our local kind of challenges, okay? I can't remember exactly what month, I think in April, late April, these recommendations were one of the first set of large recommendations that went to the 3 vice presidents. So first they were submitted to steering committee. If you, in your packet that the printer did not staple for you, the first page is kind of like the charging page with all of the teams on the back. The second set of pages are all of those recommendations that were submitted first to steering committee, and then steering committee met with, at the time, just Vice President Kaler and Vice President Reynolds. And when Vice President Kaler and Reynolds took those recommendations, decided as part of the process that Vice President Squires should be included in the discussions. And what we are affectionately calling VP3 in steering committee did is return to us a giant spreadsheet where they took all of the recommendations and tried to isolate them into sizable chunks. And they gave some directions in some cases, and those directions were part of what was sent in this initial kind of charging document. They also sent us a separate document for steering committee that was a list of functional areas that should be represented by implementation teams. And what the task they gave to steering committee was, okay, you said these are good recommendations. We think these are good recommendations that can be acted on. These are the people functionally in areas that should be representing the implementation teams. So put real people in those positions and charge them with implementing these recommendations, right? So this is the first time that steering committee has had to work with multiple implementation teams. The implementation teams in the past were very simple. Multiple measures submitted recommendations, and it was a number, and the VP said, okay. And I think for the most part, they worked with Kenny and a small implementation team to say, make it happen. In this case, it is a huge document. So just the raw document covers 13 pages that spans all parts of the campus, all parts of a student's kind of from first contact to the middle of the first semester kind of activities. The one thing that VP3 asked us as we were creating the teams is that people on steering committee should not be part of the implementation teams, and in so create a structure where steering committee kind of reports and works back and forth with the vice presidents, and then the implementation teams can, without steering committee, work on actually implementing the recommendations. So, all right, that's like there's your background. That's kind of where we are getting us to this point today. So, what we've asked you to do, if we invited you here today as part of an implementation team, is, and I apologize, I have ignored you if you sent me an email that said, can I see our team's specific recommendations? Because before we met today, I didn't want you to be focused on what your area was going to be working on. What I wanted to do first was have a conversation about what our goal was with the implementation, right? So guiding principles is adapted almost directly from what the vice presidents gave to steering committee. And in several meetings with Lou and with Stephanie, one of the things that they impressed on me and other members of steering committee is that for a year, they let a group go off and make recommendations how to change this college without any input from the vice presidents. And they were impressed with the document that they got. And so our goal is the recommendations have been made. These are the ones that we're about to hand out that are the ones that they say, okay, let's do this, let's make this happen. And so we're charging implementation teams to go out and make these recommendations happen. So all of the area all of the area representatives have been picked to be able to make decisions in their area and act on authority in their area. And you are essentially a representative of your part of the college in implementing something that affects your part of the college. There's all sorts of words in the middle, but what I want to talk about is that second to last bullet. Hold on, let me make sure that I'm the third bullet. So one of the things that we're asking is that the implementation teams implement the spirit of the recommendations. So the idea is we've already had a work group who's put the recommendations together. They put in a lot of work. We're not asking you to look at the recommendations and give us new recommendations. We're looking for functionally in your area, how can you make these recommendations work? But one of the challenges that we recognize is that making something work in your functional area might take some creativity to adapt to overcome challenges of how the recommendation was crafted for your area. And so one of the things that we're asking as you go out into your implementation team is to kind of keep in contact with steering committee, one, as a way that we know that these things are happening. And the reason I think that's important is because, short, embarrassing story, we were looking to create 3 work groups for this next year to work on creating new sets of recommendations. And one of the things we were looking at was an actual area that was submitted in these recommendations. So we had team members who were on the work group that created these recommendations, who were in the room listening to the conversation and didn't even realize that there was overlap with stuff that we had already made recommendations on. So this is a big packet, and one of the reasons that we want to have this continual conversation is so that we know where things are and we can see the progress. But also, one of the things that we're going to ask, and the reason that we want to have kind of a continual report out, is so that the other teams can also hear what's going on, because there may be overlap between what 2 different teams are trying to accomplish. Okay? And then, this is the most important thing, and this is like Tim Thomas last week says, I don't know how we do this, but the why. Like, why are we doing this? What is Guided Pathways' purpose, right? And I think before we kind of break you up into individual teams and give you the individual recommendations, the idea is, and the line in the guiding points is, keep the holistic and cohesive student experience in mind in implementing these recommendations. The why we're doing this is that right now, 3 out of every 10 students who comes to MVCC as a full-time student actually graduates. So maybe if you're a hitter in Major League Baseball, 300 is a good average, but that's like rare. That 300, batting 300 is like a good number. If academic attainment is a vehicle for improving equity for people, especially in marginalized groups, in minority groups, in impoverished areas, is important, then the goal here is to improve the success of our students so that we can improve equity and social mobility in the area. And so one of the things to keep in mind is that you're going to be handed a chunk of this, but it's part of a bigger picture. And so we want everyone, as part of an implementation team, to keep those things, those principles in mind as they're working to kind of implement the recommendations. as they have been submitted by the intake and onboarding group. Okay? So, instead of taking questions at this point, that's kind of the basic charge. What I want to do, in true wing it fashion, what Shannon and I just decided right before I started talking, is that we have copies of the individual recommendations for each group. So take a few minutes to separate into the individual groups so you can say hi if you don't know everyone in your group. Look at this tiny print that my bifocals won't like that much to get an idea of what your recommendation area looks like. And then we can talk a little bit more in terms of what your initial goals and expectations are and plans moving forward. With said, so we only have one copy of each of these for each group, save a few trees. The minute this meeting is over, we'll send an email with all of these files to all of the groups so that in each group you can look at the specific recommendations that exist. Okay? So.
Yes. So let's read off.
Yes, go ahead, Shannon.
Hold on, I need this.
They're on the back of this thing right there.
Okay, so website implementation is Chrono, Julie, Kenny, Suzanne, Miri, and Mike Henningsen.
We're going Chrono, lead the charge.
Admissions application steps to enrollment is Jen, Brandon, Kaylin, Jim, MJ, Eileen, Caitlin, Dominic, and Jenny.